Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Sunday, June 22nd, 2025, and on Sundays we talk about the purpose and meaning of life. And the theme for the vlog series this week is peace. Now, let me be clear. This was a theme that I actually chose quite some time ago. It has nothing to do, well, immediately with what's happening in the world today or most recent developments. And I'm not going to be speaking necessarily about current events per se, at least not today. I may have some references later in the week. But my point is simply that if there's a purpose and meaning to life, then we really do have to start with this concept of life, okay? Human life, I mean, as well as biological life and all of its many manifestations and so on. But in human terms, most of us are at least somewhat happy to be alive, notwithstanding the estimated 750,000 people who, on a global basis, commit suicide each year. And of course, there are millions of others who contemplate, and some of whom, of course, actively try to kill themselves each year. But considering the fact that there are now over 8 billion people, well over 8 billion on the planet alive today, then the figures we're talking about, or that I've just been quoting here, are, at most maybe 1 in every 1,000 people on the planet. Now, don't get me wrong. There are, of course, many other unhappy people in the world today. They're unhappy with their lives for a variety of different reasons. But my point is that the vast majority of people would choose life over death, even if they're, again, going through a really rough patch in their lives. And on the flip side of that, the majority of us will never choose to kill another person either, whether in the context of an interpersonal argument or conflict, or as a participant in an actual armed conflict or insurgency or civil war of some kind. But of course, some people will. There are upwards of 500,000 intentional homicides each year globally, and the numbers of deaths that are involved in armed conflicts varies quite radically from year to year, depending upon the number of actual armed conflicts and how whether there are large-scale wars or not. So we will see figures as low as 100,000 people killed in armed conflicts to sometimes millions of people in a given year. So that's something that, again, we can track and have been tracking actually for quite a few years. And it does kind of go up and down depending on the state of geopolitics and so many other things. Okay, but again, my point is that if given a choice, nearly everyone, A, would choose life and want to live as long as they can, and B, would choose not to kill someone else under almost any circumstances. Again, whether we believe in the commandment, thou shalt not kill or not, or whether it's rooted in religious convictions or not, most human beings will never kill another person in their lifetimes. And probably an even higher percentage do not, even if they have in a war or whatever, they don't ever, or they prefer not to ever have to kill someone. Okay? And then there's the human development aspect too, right? Most of us are taught from a very early age to use our words and not our fists. We are taught that violence is wrong, and we're taught parables, and we attend CCD or mosques, or we go to synagogue or whatever our religious or moral training might be, right? And even if we did get into fights when we were younger, most of us eventually put the physical fighting behind us. And even if we did have physical altercations or confrontations in adulthood, most of us certainly aren't proud of that fact, and then we generally don't condone violence under nearly any circumstance, right? And then I guess finally, and perhaps most ambitiously, could you make the case then that nearly everyone in the world wants peace? Do most people want peace in the world? Do more than half the people want peace? Or stated differently, does your philosophy regarding the purpose and meaning of life include some notion of peace, however tangentially perhaps? So for example, if you were to land upon my website, and I'm just using myself as an example, you'd find the following posted there as my personal mission statement. My life's main purpose involves using my creative abilities with words and music to share observations and insights while inspiring a passion in others to find their own voices, to express themselves with their special gifts. So I don't mention the word peace, obviously, there, but it's definitely implied, at least tangentially, it's connected. I speak of using my abilities with words and music to share my observations and insights in an effort to inspire others and to use their own voices and their gifts to express themselves. So there's no mention then of using my physical abilities or my strengths or anything, or any mention of using force, and certainly not violence to compel people to do anything. There's no mention of hurting or harming others, and that would be really bizarre, wouldn't it, if I did have such language. Instead, there's this implicit directive, at least in my personal mission statement, to try to help others, to inspire others, and so on. And again, whatever your personal mission statement, I'm guessing it probably has, some optimistic, some uplifting language, some positive language about what you'd like to do with your life, how you'd like to make a difference, whatever's most important to you, and so on. And by the way, you'll also notice, at least with my mission statement, there's no mention or specific mention of any specific group of people, right? Not even my own family. I love them, but they're not mentioned in my personal mission statement either. Much less is there mention of any of how my mission should be driven by specific religious beliefs or my ethnic identity or national allegiances or language preferences or any specific kind of ism. I start from the premise then that every single person on the planet alive today has value and dignity and purpose. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone behaves equally well. Sometimes people do some of the most horrific things imaginable, no question. And some people appear to be actively striving to devalue others or to destroy human lives. And perhaps most ironically of all, some people will literally hate me, for example, in part because I'm espousing this kind of universalist notion of human value and dignity and worth and purpose. So some people want people like me dead, or maybe people like you. And if not you or me, then perhaps someone else, right? So you see the problem here. So while we might think that the ideal of peace would be something that might be almost kind of universally appealing, when we look around us and when we dig a little bit deeper, what do we see? Is that actually the case? In fact, I truly believe that very few people genuinely, deeply, truly want peace, at least in the ways that we typically imagine that. Myself included, by the way, at least for most of my life. So, yeah, again, rather than point the finger at anyone else, I want to start by pointing the finger at myself. Okay? So I've been a peacenik, a nice simple term there, for lack of a better term, but basically as long as I can remember. All right? And I actually dropped out of university when I first went to, when I first attended all those years ago, because I wanted to join the Peace Corps, for example. All right? And almost every, kind of important cause that I've ever worked for or worked on or contributed to has dealt in some way, at least tangentially, with the cause of peace or for various, humanitarian purposes. Now, I'm not saying that, to set myself up as some holier than thou. No, not at all. Okay? And in fact, even though I've, for the most part, as an adult, and over the last couple of decades in particular, been more of a model of peace and nonviolence, I haven't always lived up to my own expectations, my own ideals in that regard, to say nothing of anybody else, or point the finger at anyone else. I've certainly always aspired to be a peaceful and a humane person. But again, my point is simply that, I haven't been perfect in that regard. I have tried to make amends for those times when I've fallen short, to be sure. And I guess if I put it in basketball terms, if I were a free throw shooter, you might say, I could reasonably argue that I've made about 99.9% of my peace shots, shall we say. But again, that means I still miss 0.1% of the time. You follow? Nobody's perfect, right? So that's what I'm suggesting there. But why not? Okay? At least in terms of being a peaceful person, or shall we say a person of peace. So in my case, and I think in the case of human beings in general, if I can generalize in this regard, there's this tendency for us to be kind of self-serving and perhaps egocentric at times, perhaps focusing mostly, maybe at times exclusively, on our own well-being and maybe the well-being of our loved ones. Maybe we stretch it a little bit. And then our concerns for others sort of ripple out from there, don't they? I mean, it's not that I don't care or that you don't care what's happening elsewhere. I like to think that I do. Don't you? But then the question is, well, how far does that care and concern truly extend? How much energy and influence and resources do any of us have? Only so much, right? And are there not times when our own needs and self-interest, shall we say, come into conflict with that of others? I think most obviously, what about those situations where we encounter others directly, or maybe indirectly, who are actively engaged then in trying to hurt us, or our loved ones, or our people, or our tribe, or our nation? Does that sound familiar? Does that happen? Of course, there are people out there who actually do want to hurt us, or our people, and so on. And they might even wish for our demise or our death. So let's be real. As peaceful as you are, have you ever wished that someone else might be killed or might just simply drop dead? What about the many truly bad actors out there today, or historically for that matter? Again, be honest. Are there not some people that you think of as evil or just horrible people, hurting and perhaps even responsible for inflicting immeasurable pain upon many, many others, and at times even responsible for killing vast numbers of other people? And don't you wish at times for some of those people to just kick the bucket, as we say colloquially, or, for the world to be rid of such horrible people? Well, I have at times. I confess. Good Catholic. I've sometimes thought it'd be a good thing if a certain leader were killed, so, a certain political leader, or at least that they died in a boating accident or something. You know what I mean? Like the world would be better off in that regard. And so, doesn't that sort of fly in the face, though, of my own personal mission statement, which involves, again, I'll remind you, in using my creative abilities with words and music to share observations and insights while inspiring a passion in others to find their own voices to express themselves with their special gifts. So that's me trying to extend my purpose beyond the purely selfish or egocentric. Yes, I'm starting from an ego or a self, right? My self, and then stating that I'd like to somehow use my creative abilities to inspire others, etc. So in other words, I'm at least stating from a philosophical perspective that I'd like to align myself with the rest of humanity, and without setting limits or boundaries as to whom I'm trying to be connected to. But Dr. J, what about those people who are trying to hurt you? Right? Well, as a reasonably healthy, functioning, sentient, cognitive human organism, I think my tendency would be to try to avoid those people who are actively trying to hurt me, or at least if there's no space where I can safely avoid them, or a place or a context where I can engage with them in a more positive or a constructive way. I mean, I'm not stupid. I don't have a death wish. If someone wants to shoot me, for example, and I hope there isn't anybody out there who wants to do that, but I'd like to avoid that person, right? I'd like to be get out of that situation if I'm ever confronted with that dire set of circumstances. But back to the original comments in today's vlog. Few of us want to shoot others, and few of us will ever be in situations where others will want to shoot us, right? Maybe once in a blue moon over the course of your lifetime. But in everyday life, and again, especially outside of, active conflicts and wars, it's actually quite rare that we would encounter in our real life, in our daily lives, real life and death situations as such, in terms of confronting other human beings directly. And again, speaking only for myself now, my best guess is that if I couldn't avoid that type of a situation, I might react with violence myself towards someone else or to defend a loved one. So again, I'm no perfect angel in this regard. And that's how I know I'm not there yet either, in terms of truly and deeply and unconditionally valuing peace. And therein lies the key term, the conditions. Nearly everyone, myself included, we have conditions for what we consider to be acceptable resolutions to conflicts, and that don't maybe at times involve violence. So stated simply, almost all of us have at least a few crucial conditions or justifications or reasons why we think it's okay to use violence, like in self-defense, kill or be killed kind of thing. So, why do billions of people, myself included, venerate the likes of a Jesus Christ? I mean, Jesus, as the Son of God, presumably had the power not to be crucified, as evidenced by the various miracles that he performed and so forth. And yet, he accepted the extraordinary pain of crucifixion and carried his own cross for that matter, just like every other common criminal of the day. And he accepted being executed then, crucified, under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, who repeatedly acknowledged that he'd found no guilt in Jesus and repeatedly sought to release him. So why didn't Jesus fight back? Well, of course, in the Christian theology, that's presumably because Jesus' suffering and death were necessary to fulfill God's plan of redemption for all humanity, the fulfillment of the Scriptures, and God's ultimate judgment and vindication. He trusted in that. Or just from a human perspective, shall we say, you could argue that Jesus was simply practicing what he preached, at least about turning the other cheek, and the importance of responding to violence with nonviolence and forgiveness. So, how far would you be willing to go for peace? How far does your willingness for peaceful resistance or to act with nonviolence, how far does that go? And what about your capacity for forgiveness? Well, Dr. J, obviously we're not Jesus. We're just normal, ordinary human beings. And as such, how can we naively adhere to ideas about universal peace and so on, especially when there are people out there who want to hurt us, or even, in some cases, who want to kill us? So I suppose it's easier then to just stop asking the question, what would Jesus do? Especially if we're not willing to do the same. Well, let me take it just a little bit further. The Hebrew greeting, shalom, means peace. And the Arab and Persian, in the Arab and Persian worlds, we usually also say something quite similar. We say salam alaikum, which, and again, with slightly different pronunciations depending upon our background, our language, our culture. But that means peace be upon you. So these are lovely thoughts, and for many, quite sincere. So why don't we just apply them universally, right? And if you look around at the world and what's happening, obviously we don't apply them universally. So, and then I want to mention too, the word shalom, it means, or it comes from the word shlemot, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, S-H-L-E-M-U-T, shlemot, which means wholeness and completeness. And so peace means something then quite specific, a harmonious state where the diverse and even opposing elements are united to form a single functioning system. So each part complements the other, recognizing the value and the contributions of the other parts in the service of the greater good. And so just think about your own body, for example, as a simple analogy or a simple example, where you have diverse organs and systems and different kinds of cells all working together harmoniously, hopefully, to sustain your life. Take certain vital parts away, or take your stomach acid and place that in your lungs, and what happens? You die, right? So peace, therefore, truly means working together, working toward the wholeness and the well-being of all of us. And Jesus said as much in many different ways. And so the challenge we all face then is that if we're indeed, the problem I should say, is that we're all evolutionarily programmed then to keep first and foremost this self, your self, and myself alive. It's our lives that we put first. And we're often not even able to see how our own well-being and our own wellness is vitally connected to everyone else's. Instead, we choose to set boundaries, and we limit our energy expenditures to just a certain segment of humanity. And so what of the rest? Well, we compete and we expend our resources and energies in conflicts, in battles, in wars, in power struggles to secure more for ourselves. And in the extreme, no matter what the cost to others, we just can't seem to be bothered to worry about that. And so I'm not sure then that there are a lot of genuinely peace-loving people in the world who value wholeness and completeness in terms of all of humanity. Instead, we all live our lives in a world filled with diverse actors, most of whom simply cannot, in all honesty, say Salam alaikum to every other person that they encounter. So let's acknowledge that first, and especially in ourselves. And I think that's a good start. And perhaps in time, we can, with humility, start to recognize the limitations of our own thinking and our own justification systems, not to mention the obvious contradictions and at times even hypocrisy in our own behavior. So that's something, again, just speaking for myself, that I started to try to do years ago, and I'm still not there. But there's some good news. I truly do see much further than I ever could before I reached these latter stages of my own life. It's taken, decades, literally, to try to understand the inherent tendencies toward conflict and even destruction, and where all that comes from, right? And again, because of my own limitations as a human being. But I've literally never stopped working to improve my understanding and self-development and the transformation towards trying to approach a state of true peace. And certainly people who would have known me years or decades ago would probably laugh and say, right, who are you to be preaching peace? Look at yourself. Oh, I don't blame them, right? I was a vastly different person. in many respects earlier in my life. And by the way, I'm not preaching peace either as such. I'm not in a position to do that. Rather, I'm just trying to fulfill my life's purpose as I understand it, the mission that I've articulated as best I can. And so to do that has required a fair bit of self-reflection and self-correction. To my way of thinking, it's not that I don't think that most people don't want peace. I honestly think that most people genuinely do, quite seriously. So I've talked to people from dozens of different cultures over the years. I've visited people in their homes in maybe 25 different countries. Again, there's a lot of other places I haven't been, but I see these universal themes come up time and again. In every home that I visited, no matter what the country and the language and so on, the culture, people have greeted me with a smile when they invite me into their homes. And they've almost always tried to also give me a lovely meal too. And they talk about in our conversations wanting to raise a healthy and happy family and live in a world of peace. So to me, it's not a question of how many people or do most people want peace. The real question is how many people are willing to change themselves and their thinking, and perhaps even their living conditions to some degree, in order to achieve peace. So I can't speak for anyone else, obviously, but I do know that it's crucial to change ourselves before we can change the world. And good on you, whoever you are, wherever you are, if you're trying to do that, if you're trying to work on yourself first, and yet at the same time not losing sight of the wholeness and your connectedness to the rest of humanity. Then you're probably on the path to peace. But it's a long and arduous one. There are no shortcuts. Okay, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, to nurture love in your hearts, and to dole out hugs of peace, shall we say. And perhaps you'll tune in tomorrow to see where we can go in terms of peace with respect to mathematics and statistics. Yeah, we can talk about peace from that angle too, and several other angles the rest of the week. Hope to see you soon.